appreciate y'all coming here. For those who don't know, my name is Musgrove. I think I know or have seen most of y'all before, so I think we are good to begin. But today we continue our presentation on Suwannee County's history, and this month, and for the next couple months, we're going to be looking at the early 1900s. I've got 3 presentations that cover the era from 1900 to 1920. I guess I could have done the 1900s and the 19-teens, but it just, a lot of stuff goes on in these 20 years. So I've just got 3 different series, or 3 different lessons in the series talking about it. So, to recap from last month, which was last year now, Suwannee County's population, Suwannee County's map is shown here in 1900. We have a lot of small communities. This is before we've got vehicles driving around. We still have some trains that are coming in. But pretty much, you lived in your own community. You traveled a mile or 2 maybe to the store, to the cotton mill, to the grist mill. Everything you needed to survive was within a few miles of you. Now, as the years progress, as the next 2 or 3 presentations progress, we will see the number of communities disappearing because now vehicles are available. But at this point in 1900, it's still horse and buggy, or mule, or walking, and so there are lots of small communities every 3 to 5 miles pretty much. You see the major railroads going through north and south, east and west, and a few others that are cutting through, especially on the west side of the county. Those are more or less logging railroads. And some phosphate that we talked about last month too. So you've got Suwannee County in 1900. Now the population had increased from 1890 population of 12,544, it had increased 50% over a 10-year period. So we were at over 18,000 people in 1900. So that is a big jump in 10 years. We've got lumber, turpentine going on. We've got manufacturing for bricks. We've got wholesales. We've got farming. All of these are big money makers in Suwannee County in 1900 and the early 1900s. It's at this period between 1900 and 1920, you've got a lot of large, nice Victorian and Queen Anne and all those other kinds of houses that are being built in especially Live Oak, a little bit of the county, but especially in Live Oak. This picture here is from probably about 1920 or so, 1915, and it shows, actually before 1915, because it's still a dirt road of Ohio Avenue. So this is South Ohio Avenue. For way of reference, that house on the front right is basically where Hardee's is today. So it looks a little bit different 100 years ago than it does now. You see all those homes lined up, most of which no longer exist. But this was the kind of wealth coming into Suwannee County and Live Oak in the first years of the 20th century. That house in the front, I think, was owned by Frank Drew by the 1920s. You've got one with J.L. Blackwell, Charles and Hildreth on the next one. Then you've got W.J. Hillman and J.D. Radford, among others, that are living in this section of town, which was kind of the residential area in the early 1900s. And again, most of these houses are gone. There's a couple that are left. One of them was moved to south of 129 when Hardee's expanded their parking lot a few decades ago. I remember it going through because they had to take down the power lines and such. But I mean, this was south of the downtown district of Live Oak in the early 1900s. As we get into the early 1900s, 1901 specifically, we see the death of John Fletcher White, Judge White. Now, John Fletcher White was born in Tennessee in 1824. He went off to college. He came back after having served in the Mexican-American War, which was 1846 to 1848. But he finished his college. He was basically a farmer, but then he was elected to the Tennessee House of Representatives. So he became a representative for his state. In the meantime, he decided to pick up a law book and start studying law. So by the time the Civil War came around, he was also a lawyer. When the Civil War began, he became an officer in the Confederate Army for Tennessee. He served as lieutenant colonel until he was captured in 1862. 1863, he was released, and he moved his family down to Suwannee County. And he set up shop in Houston, which at the time was the county seat, a few miles east of Live Oak. And he basically helped with the Confederate Army by providing goods and services. He was kind of like a quartermaster supplier for the Confederate Army. And he did that. Well, after the war, he continued his legal services as a lawyer here in Suwannee County. He then moved to Live Oak when it became the county seat in 1868 and became circuit judge for our circuit, the 3rd Judicial Circuit, in 1887. So he was that for the rest of his life until he died in 1901 at the age of 77, I believe. He also owned businesses, farms, all kinds of stuff, lots of properties. It's possible that White Avenue was named after him. If it's not Judge White, it was named after one of the other Whites that were in the area at the same time. S.J. White's one of them that comes to mind, whose house was on Duval Street. So, upon his death, he was mourned by everyone here, and his widow received a Confederate pension, and that was the pension she received until her death in 1922. Now, I don't know if you know about this, but when the Civil War ended and the soldiers of the Civil War got older, the federal government would not pay pensions for the Confederate soldiers. Now, if you're a Union soldier, sure, but the Confederate soldiers did not get a pension because, of course, they were looked upon as the enemy of the federal government. So what happened was the states took it upon themselves to support their pensioners. And so Florida gave a pension to Judge White's widow once he passed away. And she lived for another 20 years. Now then, the interesting thing about Judge White, one of those stories you learn about when you're studying history, is although he appeared to be a staunch Confederate supporter, I mean, even joining the Confederate Army as a lieutenant colonel, he actually was a Unionist. He supported the Union. So much so that he originally tried to join the Union Army when the Civil War started. His neighbors found out about it and basically said, if you don't join the Confederate Army, we're going to lynch you. He decided that service in the Confederate Army was a little bit better than lynching. And then his men elected him as lieutenant colonel. Okay, whatever. But he became an officer. So he served in the Confederate Army for a year. But while he was serving, he was also a spy. He was passing information on to the Union Army. And in 1862, he decided he'd had enough fighting. And so he worked it out where he and his men would be captured by the Union Army. And so he was captured, sent out east to the prisoner of war camp. Well, he was a staunch Methodist, and he was friends with some Methodist preachers. One of them, who was in Washington, D.C., knew about his Union support. He basically served the Confederacy under duress. And so he wrote to Washington, to Congress or whatnot, to try to get him released. And that's actually what happened. But the person who actually wrote up saying, hey, you need to release the guy, was none other than Abraham Lincoln. That is a letter or a note respectfully submitted to the Secretary of War with my opinion that Lieutenant Colonel J.F. White should be bailed to Parson W.J. Brownlow, A. Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln basically got Lieutenant Colonel of the Confederate Army, John F. White, released, and he basically, that was why he moved, because he knew he probably wouldn't be accepted back in Tennessee so much. So he moved down to Florida with his family in 1863. And what happened was, instead of rejoining the Army, he was, as I said, he basically was obtaining supplies for the Confederate Army. And you find as you study history that a lot of people who supported the Union did that. They didn't necessarily want to fight for the Union Army. They might have loved where they lived. And they decided, hey, I don't want to directly support the war effort, but I'll just help, provide supplies and that kind of stuff. So a lot of Unionists or those who were not in favor of fighting did that. And that's what John F. White did throughout the remainder of the war. But again, he died in 1901. He was mourned by the community. As far as I have been able to tell, nobody here in Suwannee County knew about his Union sympathies and his spying and trade, or whatever you want to call him. But supposedly he would go visit family back in Tennessee, and they knew what was going on. But in an era before the internet, he didn't get passed on down here. So he died. Again, his wife got a Confederate pension for 20-something years after he died. So interesting things. And then when you see that Abraham Lincoln himself petition for his release, it's kind of interesting. Very interesting. Signs of people you don't necessarily know about or learn about even in their lifetime. So,
Got that pension from Tennessee or Florida?
from Florida, because she lived here at that point. That was actually his second wife. His first wife died in 1865. They are buried over, or the right-hand side is over in Houston, at the Houston Cemetery, where he and most of his family are buried. Other things going on. The timber industry is very big. Now, I have read in different books over the years that Suwannee County during this period produced 300,000 barrels of turpentine, 1 million barrels of rosin, 2 million board feet of lumber. Now, I don't know, they didn't say over what period. Was it a day, a month, a year? I don't know. So I'm throwing those numbers out. I don't know what time period we're looking at, but during this period at some point, a lot of stuff was being produced. Many people made their fortunes here in Suwannee County. People like T.T. Scott, the Dowlings, Richard Sears even made some money here, the Tenners. Lots of different families, some of whom still reside here today, made a lot of money in these early years of the 1900s. 1905, there was an article that stated, quote, Suwannee County, with a population of 20,000, contains 440,000 acres. The greater part of the county is either under cultivation or rich in tracts of valuable timberland. The population of the country districts is made up largely of a very thrifty class of farmers who raise cotton, corn, cane, potatoes, cattle, and hogs. Cotton is the money crop. Enough of the staples are raised, however, to make the farmer independent. He is thus able to hold the cotton for the higher market prices. The farming lands are fertile, and good harvests are reaped every season. Situated in such a section, a city in its midst has a fortunate setting. So even other places were noticing how much live oak and Suwannee County had to offer, especially in the agriculture industry. Lots of people, again, coming in and getting rich. Live oak, especially, was growing. In 1901, the first electric plant was built on the east side of town by this man here, George Porter. We talked about him some last month. He was in charge of the local militia group, the Suwannee Rifles, which would later become the Florida National Guard during the Spanish-American War, things like that. He built his electrical plant real close to Thomas Dowling's huge sawmill, and that was pretty much East 90 was the industrial section of live oak at this point. So much so that the Hillman family decided, we don't want people, when the first thing they see coming in, to be all these big industries and sawmills and planing mills. So they built an alternate route into town, which became Helvenston Street, or Helvenston Avenue, what is it called? Anyway, Helvenston Street, that street. So that became the alternate way to come into town without having to go through or go past all these huge industries that were there on the east side of town, close to where Brown Lantern is and just past that, pretty much today. So George Porter did that. He did lots of different things. And again, we talked about it more last month. He also had the Live Oak Manufacturing Company, which was one of those businesses there on the east side of town. Dressed lumber. He operated the light plant. He had also an ice manufacturing plant. So by 1905, the company's mills that he had, they were at capacity. Even though they were large, they were at capacity. Even his ice plant had been increased in capacity to 20 tons, and it was still running full force. Lots of things going on. Picture in the right is he and I believe his son, or one of his sons, in the car that was nicknamed the Red Devil. There's actually a story. In 2000, a book came out called Echoes of the Past. It was written by a lot of folks here in Suwannee County as one of the histories of Suwannee County. And towards the back of the book, there's a whole section written by George Porter's son about the Red Devil. So it's kind of humorous if you have time to find it. I'm sure the library's got a copy of it. But it's very interesting to read through. But he talks about the Red Devil a lot. But it was basically a 1903 Oldsmobile. At the time it was a great car, one of the best cars around. It was a one-cylinder, 4 horsepower. Whew, times have changed. And Mr. Porter, the son, is talking about the other 2 or 3 folks in town that had one. One's like W.J. Hillman, which I'll show a picture of his in a minute. Mr. Dowling, and there might have been one other person at the time that basically had cars, and that was it. Everybody else was still using horses and buggy. And there was kind of this kind of competition between these folks about who would get the biggest and best car. And so Mr. Porter talks about Mr. Hillman actually getting one that had a 9.5 horsepower engine. So it's like, I gotta do better. So he then bought a 2-cylinder, 12.5 horsepower engine to put in the Red Devil. And it's amazing. He said when the car was bought, his, I think, grandmother was the first person to ride in it. And she was just amazed because they were flying down the road at 12 miles an hour. It's like, this is how it's meant to be. And 12 miles an hour, that was a big deal back then. So anyway, if you read that story, there's a lot of good stuff I don't have time to talk about. But let's just say he hit a couple cows at night with his car because the lights went out and stuff. So it's funny to read, very funny to read. But anyway, George Porter was big in this era and helping to increase live oaks, especially size, and what was offered to the community. Again, things like electricity. The freight depot. Increased trade coming in through the many railroads we've talked about over the last couple months, and even more coming in. I think I'll talk about more next month, like the LOP&G and whatnot. We needed to have a better depot. The old depots just no longer were cutting it. So in 1903, the Atlantic Coastline Railroad built the depot that still exists. It's now the Suwannee County Museum, Historical Museum. They're just north of Ohio Avenue. It was used for about 60 years as a freight depot until they shut down here in Live Oak. And it sat abandoned for about 25 years before it was renovated in the 1990s to become the Historical Museum. And so the Historical Commission, of which I'm chair, runs it today as the museum. Same year that building is constructed, the town of Live Oak, which was incorporated, not established, but incorporated in 1878, became a full-fledged city. They changed their charter, and in 1903, Live Oak became a city with greater powers and ability to tax and other things. So 1903, Live Oak becomes a city. Same year, later in that same year, there's a picture of that building in the 60s, by the way. The same year, 1903, in November, the county commissioners decide that the courthouse that they have been using for 30 years at this point, it's outlived its usefulness. They want to build something bigger. They want to build something better. This is the old courthouse in the 1960s or 70s, right as it's about to be torn down, or in the process of being torn down. But it's outlived its usefulness. They need something bigger, especially since Live Oak and Suwannee County has grown so much in the 30 years since the courthouse was built.
Where was that?
It was originally where the courthouse is today. And it was built in 1873 on the parking site. And so what they did is they agreed to have a new one. They accepted the courthouse plans of Benjamin B. Smith of Montgomery, Alabama, who built a lot of public buildings in the early 1900s and late 1800s. And they picked him, and he would get a 5% compensation off the total cost. Total cost being $41,300. So 5% went to Mr. Smith. They also chose the next month as those who were going to build it are Hugger and Brother, which were also of Montgomery. So they already had a working relationship with Benjamin Smith. So they built the building, and that $41,300 is about $1.04 million today. So that's how much the courthouse we have today costs. So they decided at the next meeting they were going to put it in the same site as this building was. And they had to do some changes. They had to do some stuff before construction began, like move the old courthouse. So that's what they did. They basically gave it to the estate of John F. White, who was dead at this point. But they gave it to his estate, basically to move across the street. And they said, hey, we'll give it to you if you'll let the county use it until the new courthouse is constructed. The family was fine with that, so that's what happened. And so it was moved to the corner of Pine and Wilbur Streets, part of where the jail is now. That's where it was. They also had the courthouse vault, that was a wooden courthouse, but they had a brick vault or metal vault. They gave it to Connor Bryson. And they said, hey, we'll give it to you if you build a new brick building around it. So he did that and allowed the clerk of court to use it while the courthouse was being constructed. The closet, as it's called in the minutes, which is the toilets, outhouse, really, they gave to the city marshal to be put wherever he wanted to. Wherever the greatest need was, I guess. I don't think it was portable per se, but he moved it to where it needed to be moved. And I'm assuming filled up the hole too. So the county commissioners invited all of the Masonic lodges to come to the ground laying, the cornerstone laying, which happened on February 29th, 1904. And construction lasted a few months, finished August 1st, 1904. Pretty much it was smooth, going through the minutes. There weren't really any major issues going on like sometimes happens. So it was completed August 1904. The same day, they hired Mr. J.C. Lyle for $350 to put electricity into the building. So that was taken care of, no big deal. The upstairs courtroom, which still exists in a smaller form, but the upstairs courtroom, right after completion, could hold 600 people. Not anymore. Over the years, they've created offices on the bottom part of the courthouse courtroom. The top floor, the mezzanine level, which is where the African Americans were allowed to go, they have stopped using because it's not ADA compliant and whatnot. But it's still imposing sight. Courthouse was more appropriate for a county of our stature and of a city like Live Oak of our stature in the early 1900s. So that's a picture shortly after completion. You still see the dirt roads, lots of trees lining Ohio Avenue, picket fence, wood picket fence, and some of the old houses, Magnolia House and whatnot, that were there for several decades after that. Now the bottom right, if you look very carefully, you can see a horse trough right there. That horse trough supposedly still exists and is at Heritage Park and Gardens on loan by the George Harmony family. Supposedly it's that same one. I don't know for sure. I'm just passing it along because that's what I was told. And that's what they're playing. But anyway, that was the courthouse shortly after completion. Very beautiful. Now in the 1960s, we had an addition added onto the back, which is a lot of where the clerk's office is today. But the style is still the same as that. Beautiful, beautiful courthouse. One of the oldest in the state still in use as a courthouse. Other things going on. It was at this time that Live Oak reached kind of, I call it the golden era. The population was pretty much what it is today, between 6,000 to 7,200 people. But we were actually the 5th largest city in the state. 1905 state census, which federal censuses are done every 10 years, in 1900, 1910, etc. The state censi, I guess is the plural, are done 1905, 1915. But the 1905 one, they were determining, trying to figure out who was the biggest. And they realized it was Jacksonville, then Pensacola, then Tampa, then Key West, then Live Oak. So we were the 5th largest city in the state of Florida, and we were the largest inland city. We were bigger than Tallahassee, bigger than Gainesville, Orlando, Ocala. There actually was a discussion, and this newspaper article talks about it. It took about a year to get all the information in. And the argument was, which city's bigger, Miami or Live Oak? Live Oak got them beat. And Live Oak was the 5th largest city. Now they said if you include all the suburbs outside of the city limits and all that task, Miami might be a little bit bigger. Maybe. But Live Oak is the 5th largest. So that was wonderful. As part of its growth and as part of it having recently become a city, Live Oak decided to buy the waterworks of Mr. Thomas Dowling. He had built that probably a decade or so before, 1897, I believe. And that had been built because he wanted to have running water at his house, which was across the street. He and his rich neighbors wanted to have water. So he basically had been using it as a private business, but then the city bought it out. And up until rather recently, it was still used as a water tower. It wasn't probably either the oldest in the nation or oldest east of the Mississippi or oldest of the South, depending on who you talk to. But it has been shut down since then. I wish they'd run it for something, but the tower is still there. You can still see it. As Live Oak is building, in 1906 something else happens. They construct this 2-story office/post office on Ohio Avenue. This was built again as a post office, which would have been the at least 3rd one that I know of in Live Oak's history over the 40 years. It was built as post office on the 1st floor and then office spaces on the 2nd floor. I've got the original documentation of the courthouse for this building, its construction and whatnot. Interesting stuff to read through. But this was used for many years. It was only used for about 10 years as a post office, and then they needed more space, and they built that one on partially. That one just shut down last year. Top floor, again, various offices. Sometimes it was called, looks like the West Building or the Day Building, different eras. The bottom floor, much of it was ripped out to become a gas station. Howland's gas station at one point was there. And the top floor had things like the recruiting office, Dr. Lee's dentist's office, and some other things. By the 1970s, the top floor either burned or was torn down. And so you were left with basically part of the first floor left of this building. Funny story with Dr. Lee's dentistry office up there. First off, the museum has his chair, his dentist chair. So you can see that if you come Saturday. Second thing, former county or city manager told me years ago when they were doing some work between this building and the jail, they were digging into the ground and they found like thousands of teeth. So it sounds like they would just throw them out the window when they pulled teeth. So different times, different times. Very few people recognize the building because it's changed so much over the years. That's another view of it. The courthouse would be just to the right out of the picture, and the Magnolia House is behind it. These are two pictures taken about 40 years apart, showing it with the first and second floors complete, and this shows with the bottom floor halfway ripped out to be the gas station. I had another picture that was an aerial that shows it just as it is today, but I didn't put it in here. So things have changed, but what's left of it is that same building. So the first generation of homes, the first generation of wooden buildings in downtown Live Oak were being replaced mainly by brick buildings, some wooden, but mainly brick. The city pretty much said, hey, if you're going to build a building downtown Live Oak, it's got to be made of brick to stop the fires which continue to ravage downtown for decades. Still does occasionally. So they were being replaced, especially a lot of the homes, because this was not the original downtown Live Oak. We've talked about it before, and I'll show a picture in a minute. But downtown Live Oak originally was where Houston and Connor Street crossed the railroad tracks. That was the original downtown. So this area had started out as homes, residential area, but after the Parshleys moved there, it became the downtown center of Live Oak. So there were still old homes there until the early 1900s. They finally started getting rid of them and building brick businesses. Lots of commercial structures. 1908 article states that all the professions were represented, including, quote, physicians, surgeons, opticians and oculists, preachers and teachers, attorneys, civil engineers, dentists, veterinary surgeons, and all others that are needed in a wide awake community. So we had all kinds of stuff here in Live Oak in 1908. And also that same article later on talks about some of the hotels that we had, places like the Ethel Hotel, the recently completed Suwannee Hotel, which is there on the right of those two pictures. The Ohio House, the Brown House, which the Brown House was the old White House, that was the old courthouse. Several other boarding houses. There had been miles of sidewalk poured, which was replacing the wooden sidewalks that were there beforehand. The Hildreth family was kind of responsible for that. So this picture is taken in either 1906 or 1907. It's taken looking south on Ohio Avenue. Notice again, it's still dirt, basically. It's not paved, it's not bricked or anything. And a little kid turning around to look at the photographer. But most of these buildings, as you probably know, still exist in Live Oak today. Let's see, what else? Several businesses. Another one that was in this era was the Robbins and McGehee, the foundry, ironworks and whatnot. They had their shop on Connor Street, kind of where Town and Country Tire is. That area right there is where Robbins and McGehee was. They could repair a bolt, or they could repair a locomotive, everything in between. So they had all kinds of that kind of foundry work. Other companies we have that you don't have pictures of, things like the Live Oak Sash and Door Company, the Florida Cooperage Company, the Live Oak Cooperage Company. So lots of barrels being made and things like that. Sashes, blinds, doors. Again, lots of construction. So you needed those parts to build houses and those parts to build buildings. So that was going on. In 1905, our leading merchant was the Worth Stevens Company. It had everything from general merchandise to cotton to produce. They had 16,000 square feet in their building and had all kinds of stuff. Let's see. Dry goods, clothing, shoes, hats, notions, furniture, heavy and fancy groceries, hardware, farming implements, labor-saving farming machinery, wire fence, fertilizers, Sea Island cotton. They had all kinds of stuff. They were the Walmart of the day, I guess you could say, for Live Oak anyway, and for Suwannee County. These pictures were taken in 1908. They were from a Board of Trade newsletter. Board of Trade would be what we'd call the Chamber of Commerce today. But it was showcasing Suwannee County, and especially Live Oak, what it had because of the Live Oak Board of Trade. So they focused on Live Oak. They talked about Suwannee County some, but they focused on Live Oak. So you see some pictures of it. That building exists today. Other buildings. Heinley Stevens Company, pretty much just behind the Worth Stevens Company. Had livestock, buggies, carriages, 33,000 square feet of space. So they actually had the bigger space, but they didn't sell as many different things as Worth Stevens. They had a combination for 100 head of cattle at one time. So, I mean, this was downtown Live Oak.
Yeah.
You got hundreds of cows, some of which might have gotten out and the Red Devil ran over. So might have been the same ones, I don't know. But it was pretty much where Alomar Court is today in that region, that area. Also, Florida Livestock Vehicle Company, run by Sid Connor. J.B. Barton had a big furniture store on Ohio Avenue, pretty much where Susie's is, that area around Susie's. Hair Hardware on Howard Street. Sashes, doors, blinds, paints, cutlery, mechanical contrivances, sporting goods. And the cool thing about that building was it had an electrical elevator. I mean, that was noted in the article, hey, even have an electrical elevator. So that was apparently something that we didn't really have around Live Oak. But that was part of the Millennium Park, across from the Veterans Park. I think it was Fleets at one point. I mean, Gibbs, not
Gibbs,
Fleets.
yeah.
Yeah, Gibbs at one point. So that's that building right there, close to where the Suwannee Democrat used to be, that area. Other things going on as Live Oak especially was prospering. You've got lots of drug companies. Dr. Hal F. Airth had a drug company. You've got the Live Oak Coca-Cola Bottling Works, close to downtown at one point. You've got the City Pharmacy, Live Oak Drug Pharmacy, and Barkley and Groover. That is Dr. Barkley there with the bow tie. I actually have some personal effects from he and his wife at the courthouse. They were donated to me years ago. I was looking through it this morning before I got here. Things like some old fancy eyeglasses that didn't have rims. It's probably what you just put them on your nose. That's probably the ladies' glasses. Old spoons, engraved spoons, a lot of old pictures, most of which don't have any inscriptions on them. So I have no idea who they are. So that's a warning to y'all who have pictures. Try to mark them somehow so future people can figure out who they are. One of the funny, actually I've got his wallet. His wallet's in there too. No money, already checked. It does have his Masonic Lodge card though, and some other notes. One funny thing in there is he's got a coin. It's a good luck charm from the Good Luck Club or something, but on it is a swastika. Now this was prior to the Nazi Party existing, so at that point it was a Hindu good luck charm or good luck symbol. So there's the coin about that big that I've got also from him. So just interesting stuff, newspaper articles and whatnot. But that's Dr. Barkley. Now most of these druggists, most of these pharmacists or these doctors, they make house calls. They go out, some of you probably remember house calls from doctors. Lots of different companies, let's see. F. Rubenstein, S.J. White, Ladies Emporium, Lewins, H.A. Blackburn, Lewin and Helvenston. Those are all large dry goods firms, just in Live Oak. Also, Ladies Millinery, the Bandbox, the Bon-Ton Dry Goods, the Ladies and Children's Furnishing Store, several different places you could go for all kinds of nice things, whether you're a guy or girl. Newest Fashions. So there was lots of stuff going on. And as I've already read off a minute or two ago, the Ethel Hotel was the place to go in the early 1900s before the Suwannee Hotel was built. Ethel Hotel, there's a picture of it there. Run by Hobson and Company. It was a large hotel for our size, but it was pretty much full all the time. You had lots of people coming into town, people buying up cotton, buying and selling things. And so it was pretty much at capacity almost year round, it seemed, from the records. You had, as I mentioned before, the Brown House, Magnolia House, the Gruber House, lots of different hotels. This is Connor Street. Railroad tracks right here. I've got another picture that'll show it better in just a minute. But yeah, this is about where North Florida Printing is today, that area. This was Connor Street. Connor Street was pretty much the main drag originally. And this brick portion of the Ethel Hotel, which by the 1900s was the only portion, had been built in 1884, 1885, I believe. But there was a wooden version, a wooden part of it that was even earlier. It is also the site, it used to be called the Connor Hotel. Nelson Connor, who was our second clerk of the court, ran it, and his family. I talked about this in the past. That's the one that his family lost to Mrs. Parsley because of the blackmail suit. Fun stuff I've already talked about. Watching on video. You've also got a business college. The Southern Business College had recently opened its doors in the early 1900s. So it was training people like typists, accountants, those kinds of things. So you've got business colleges coming in to Live Oak. We had 5 newspapers in Suwannee County in 1905. Suwannee Democrat, Florida Christian Advocate, Present Truth Messenger, the Florida Crescent, and I think the Live Oak Daily Democrat was the 5th one. I didn't write it down originally, but I think that's what it was. Which was pretty much a little short 1 or 2 page version of the Suwannee Democrat that came out every day. So you get the latest news every day. And then you get more news once or twice a week with the Democrat. That 1905 article I was just quoting from a minute ago said there were too many grocery stores to even list. We have lots of places to shop. This picture I found a few years ago, taken from Dowling's water tower, looking southwest into downtown Live Oak. This is the Ethel House. This is Connor Street. These are the ACL and SAL, the old ones, before they built the current museum. The museum is now over here in this area. But this is Ohio Avenue. And you see several railroad tracks. Live Oak was a hub of railroads at this point. You've got most of these buildings still exist. There's Love Inc., which at the time was Worth Stevens. But that's the Ethel Hotel. Lots of businesses. Beautiful picture. Interesting stuff to see. I wish it had better quality a little bit further back because you can't even see the courthouse at this point. But again, I dated it in 1897 and 1903 because the water tower was built in 1897, so they couldn't be taking the picture before it was built. And then the current museum, the freight depot, is not showing up yet. So, old picture, old picture. People making some money. One of them is Captain W.J. Winder Josephus Hillman. He went by W.J. I would have too. He was a penniless boy when he arrived at Live Oak in the late 1800s. If I recall correctly, he was trying to go to Texas, where I think he had a brother. Well, Live Oak was the junction point between 2 railroads at that point, and instead of heading west, the train was heading east, so he jumped off. And it was basically what the town was Connor Hotel, now the Ethel Hotel, in the early 1900s. He basically started working there as a grip boy, carrying the luggage from the railroad. This is the passenger depot of both of those, the ACL and SAL. He would carry the luggage from here to there to the hotel. got paid to do that. And then he did a few other things. He worked for the Suwannee Democrats' predecessor, the Banner, for a little while, but then apparently he messed that up. I guess he typeset wrong and messed up the newspaper. So he got fired from that job. And then he became a convict labor camp guard. And as we've talked about before, the convict labor camp system was huge in Suwannee County in the late 1800s. At one point we had half of all the state's convicts working in lumber, turpentine, even railroad construction. And so he became a guard in that. And the book American Siberia that I've mentioned before to you, if you haven't read it, please read it. It's 400 pages or so. But it was written by Captain J.C. Howell, who was in charge of the convict camp system in Florida in 1870s, 1880s. I think he wrote it in 1893. The book, most of the book occurs in Suwannee County. The very opening page is Live Oak. They're walking. He's basically at this depot waiting for the convicts to get off the train. So you can read a whole lot about Suwannee County. But I want to point out that he mentions Captain Hillman. At the time, he's still kind of a young, snotty-nosed guard. He thinks he knows better. And Captain Powell doesn't speak too highly of him because he accidentally let some of the convicts escape. But he learned his lesson. He became a much better guard, so much so that he was actually in charge of the convict camps after Mr. Powell left. He had hundreds of convicts, 1,460 convicts, under his direct care. That's where he got the name captain. It wasn't because he was in the military or a steamboat captain. It was because he was the captain of the convicts, or the convict guards. So he did that for the state, and then he went into private business for himself and made a lot of money in Central Florida as they would lease out those convicts to different private companies. So he did that. He moved back to Live Oak after he made some money, went into business with lots of other things. And over here on the right, you see him with his 1903 Cadillac, I think it is. That's him on the right. Actually, the whole picture shows most of Live Oak's cars meeting up in the early 1900s. There's like 3 or 4 cars. So it's about as much of a traffic jam as you could get in Live Oak in this period. But that's him in his little white car on the right. I think Mr. Porter was also jealous because he was the first one with the steering wheel. The previous vehicles didn't have steering wheels. They had like
Tillers.
Tillers, yeah, and fork-looking things, which is a Thomas Dowling story that's funny too. But yeah, that was the expensive thing back then. Oh, and he was a stickler for roads. At this point, roads were few and far between. They're mainly just trails for wagons. But as cars came to be purchased more and more often in Suwannee County, they needed to get better roads, and he was a stickler for it. He would push for those roads to get better, and he would actually get on to people. Because you see these old trails had a bunch of tree stumps still. And a car going 12 miles an hour, hitting a stump is going to mess something up, the axle or something. And so pretty much he got upset at people if they left a stump. Because every car was supposed to have an axe and stuff like that, so you could cut the stumps down and the trees down if need be. And he'd get on to people if they didn't do it, if they drove past it. So much so that later on in life he became, when Governor Hardy became governor, who was from Live Oak, he became first chairman, or one of the chairmen of the State Road Department, Florida DOT we call it now. Big into stuff. He, by the early 1900s, or the by the 19-teens and 20s, between his turpentine, between all of his other businesses, he became our first millionaire in Live Oak. And I think that's actually with $1 million in the bank. Lots of money. He had lots of money. This was his house here on the front left. This picture was taken about 1915-ish, but this was his house, beautiful house. Again, Ohio Avenue, looking north this time. Lots of beautiful houses. This house right here is the one that was moved 129 South. It's still there, just in a different location. So his house was a show place. People come from all around. He and his wife, Leela, did not have children, but one of the things they did was on Christmas Day, he would hand out a silver dollar to the first 100 children who showed up at his house. $1 back then. 1920s, early 1930s. That's a lot of money. He died in 1931, August 29th, and the whole community mourned his loss because he had been a great man for the community, cared for a lot of people and a lot of things. I met a gentleman probably 15, 20 years ago now when I was doing a presentation at a museum. He was from a class of 1942, who I believe all the males in there went off to the war. But he talked about being a young boy when Captain Hillman died in 1931. So he would have been probably 6, 7 years old. And he remembers going to the Suwannee Hotel. And apparently, upstairs somewhere, Captain Hillman was being embalmed. Because the Suwannee Hotel had an elevator. And as he's standing there watching the elevator, it opens up and they've got buckets of blood. Captain Hillman's blood that they're bringing out. And the guy, when his mother realized what was going on, she shooed him away, but he'd already seen it. And he still remembered it, 70 years later. So, speaking of the Suwannee Hotel, there's the Suwannee Hotel, circa 1920. It was built in 1908, 1907, 1908. A local favorite. It kind of took over from the Ethel House, or the Ethel Hotel, to be the best hotel in Live Oak in Suwannee County. It was there until mid-1970s. It was torn down. The 1960s and 1970s were a bad time for Suwannee County, and Live Oak especially, when you're talking about historic buildings. Out with the old, in with the new. That was kind of the era. Mm-hmm. Tear down the old stuff, let's put up all this modern and postmodern stuff. And Suwannee Hotel was one of those that was torn down to be replaced by a parking lot and drive-through for the bank. Part of what helped make Live Oak and Suwannee County economically viable and a lot of people rich was cotton. Cotton being king during this era. Some sources say that Suwannee County produced 10% of the world's supply. Others say 10% of the United States supply of what was called the Sea Island cotton. Very, very fine, short staple of cotton. Very, very good stuff. And we produced a lot. Whether it's 10% of the world, 10% of the United States, or even 10% of the states, it was a lot of cotton that we produced. A lot of people made a lot of money. We had cotton gins and establishments all over Suwannee County. One of the biggest ones was the Sea Island Cotton Ginning Company on Howard Street. Well, at the end of Howard Street, where it meets Houston Street. So it was big, lots of stuff going on. It comes to about a block. Lots of stuff going on there. This is an insurance map of that area. You will see the Suwannee Ginning Company at the top right. North is to the left, to the right. And you will see Howard Street, dead ending into Suwannee Ginning Company, turning a block south and then going west again, past the Florida Institute, which later became the area of the Suwannee Hospital, excuse me. This is where First Baptist is today, and the parking lot for it. At the time, this was the Baptist church. This was the old Live Oak High School. And this green building was the location, not necessarily the building, that's a blacksmith shop there, but that was the location of the original post office in Live Oak. This was downtown Live Oak when Live Oak was established. The railroad track was right here on the edge, and between this side and the north side of the tracks, that was the business district. And the original railroad depot was here in Live Oak. But like I said earlier, when the Parsleys moved in, they wanted to move it a little closer to themselves. They had the money and the know-how, and they were able to get it moved to what we consider today downtown Live Oak. But that was downtown Live Oak 40 years before this. Other folks who made a lot of money in this era of Live Oak and Suwannee County being big. Horace or Horatio, Filmore, Dexter, I've seen it both ways. But HF, because he goes by HF usually in all the documents. Horace or Horatio Filmore Dexter was the son of Thomas D. and Mary Ann Dexter. We've talked about those folks in past presentations. Thomas Dexter being an early settler. He was here by the 1820s, 1830s. He was also Suwannee County's largest slave owner before the Civil War. He is the one that died in a cotton gin house fire in 1863, because one of his slaves mentioned it years later. talked about it. Anyway, he was the son of Thomas D. and Mary Ann Dexter, but he was a successful businessman in his own right. He had lots of businesses, lots of property. He built part of the downtown business district that we have today. He had a 2-story Hotel Bon Air that he built, I guess, just before the Suwannee Hotel was built. And it was where the current Chamber of Commerce is located. Nice hotel where it was built. Unfortunately, it burned down not long thereafter. According to documents we have in the courthouse, he sues Mr. Dowling because he claims Mr. Dowling's waterworks and fire stuff did not get to him in time. The water did not have enough pressure. Excuse me, I'll get it out. There was not enough pressure to put the fire out. There's a lot of information in there. I don't think Mr. Dowling lost it. I think Mr. Dexter lost his case. So the Hotel Bon Air burned down. It was a vacant property. The city purchased it and it became City Hall. That's a story for probably next month, which I think I'll talk about more next month anyway. So let's see, but Mr. Dexter, he died in 1907 at the age of 58. His insurance, stocks, bonds, and the unpaid loans from citizens, just that stuff came out to a value at that point, $122,000. That's equivalent to $4.4 million today. Now, that does not include his thousands of acres of property. That does not include his multitude of houses that he owned, or his businesses. That's just stocks, bonds, insurance, and unpaid loans. The guy was rich. The guy was rich. He had built his home on Duval Street. According to the tax rolls, it looks like it was around 1893, 1894, because there was a big jump in value at that point. He basically tore down and replaced an older house, wooden house, built a nice fancy 2-story house for himself, and then next door he built one for his daughter. Nice fancy houses. Now, this Dexter home was, if it was not the largest in Live Oak, it was one of the largest. And actually, when you look at the tax rolls, his house was more valuable than the Thomas Dowling house, which is now the 406. So you know how grandiose that looks today. How it would have looked back then as a new building. Dexter's house was even bigger and better. Let's see. And the house he built for his daughter next door was almost as big as this one. So he had a lot of money. Lots of money. And this was at a time when Duval Street and Ohio Avenue, those thoroughfares were where the biggest, nicest houses were in all of Suwannee County. If you were rich, you lived there. Now, some of them still exist today. You can see them, but just picture those, kind of like I showed you earlier in the presentation, lines of 2- and 3-story houses on both sides of the road. That's what was here on Duval Street. Very imposing. This is an aerial photo taken from the water tower. This is Duval Street. And of course, this being the water tower, the fire department today would be about right here. Old City Hall would be over here. This is looking at what we now call John Hill Park, the old rec center. That was the Dexter home. And he built another home nearby. This home still exists today. That's the old S.J. White. No, not S.J. White. It's an old home. I forget who owned it. But that one still exists today. Hamilton Street is right past there if you look through the trees. Ohio Avenue didn't keep going north at this point. So Hamilton was the main street going north to Hamilton County, hence Hamilton Street. But this was his house and his property. He had enough property that they used to run the fairgrounds on the Dexter home property. So that's how much property he had in that area. You can't see it. But I mean, lots of nice houses and lots more out of frame. In 1958, the county decided to buy up the property to establish that recreation department. And the original goal was to renovate the old Dexter place, but it was just too far gone, so they tore it down and built that brick building that's there today, pretty much on the same site. Other things going on in Suwannee County, not just Live Oak. I know focused on Live Oak today, but other things were going on at the same time. 1901, the Florida legislature again petitioned the United States Congress for $100,000 so they could kind of clear the channels in the Suwannee River trying to get rid of the dangerous shoals and things like that to make it easier for steamboats to go up and down river. It failed, like the previous petitions, so we still have the Suwannee River more or less as it was then. The Suwannee County Clerk's Office, where I work, expanded in 1907. The state laws changed, and it created a criminal court of record in Chapter 5771 of state government. They created a criminal court of record, so that'd be on violations of the criminal laws of the state that were not capital punishment. So lesser things. We call them things like misdemeanors today, criminal traffic, those kinds of things. There were 6 terms per year held in live oak for that criminal court of record. Same year, 1907, there was the Florida legislature passed an act to protect fish on the Suwannee and the Withlacoochee rivers here in Suwannee County and the surrounding neighborhood. So basically, during spawning season, it made it illegal to catch fish between March 15th and June 15th. You could not catch fish on the Suwannee River or the Withlacoochee River. A lot of people have been fishing on it and getting rid of them. So if you were to do that, it'd be a misdemeanor, and you would pay a fine not exceeding $50 or spend 60 days in jail, up to 60 days in jail. They took their fishing seriously. So, no fishing between March 15th and June 15th on the Suwannee and Withlacoochee rivers. Just watching out for the fish, making sure they can reproduce. Also, 1905, there was an election. They legalized the election held in Live Oak to raise $200,000 in bonds for street upgrades, paving, purchasing the Dowling Water Works, sewage systems, to build a city hall that they built in a couple of years, lots of different things. Also established a fire department for the city. And they amended the 1903 city charter to allow for that. So as we end the first part of our early 1900s presentation, this is a map of Live Oak, or in Suwannee County, in 1907. Compared to the beginning, there's a lot less communities. They are starting to dry up because more people are getting cars, or they're riding the railroad, the trains. So you don't need all those little communities every 3 to 5 miles. So these, as of 1907, are the largest communities in Suwannee County, places we recognize like Live Oak, Branford, O'Brien, McAlpin, Houston, but even places like Ricksford, Custer, Padlock. But they were becoming fewer and fewer. And as we go through this series, I think you've probably seen that happening. So, that ends today's presentation. Next month, we will continue on the early 1900s, kind of 1907-ish and up for a little bit.